And we begin tonight with the breaking news that former Vice President Mike Pence testified before the D.C. grand jury investigating Donald Trump's role in the January 6th insurrection. The path to Pence's testimony was cleared yesterday when a three-judge panel rejected Trump's emergency bid to prevent Pence from testifying. Pence's appearance is a testament to the speed at which Special Prosecutor Jack Smith is moving with his investigation into the former president's intent to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power. Pence, who is considering a 2024 presidential run, spent nearly 8 hours in front of the grand jury answering detailed, probative questions from lawyers. This is the first time the former vice president shared his own personal experiences to anyone connected with law enforcement. Prior to this, he refused a congressional subpoena from the January 6th committee, saying that they had no right to his testimony. Today, roughly 30 Washington, D.C. residents got to hear his unvarnished account, or one that wasn't edited for a book. It should not be lost on the public how close Trump supporters came to upending American democracy and violently attacking members of Congress, including the vice president.
Bring it out!
Bring out Pence!
Bring him out!
Bring out Pence!
Bring him out!
Bring out Pence!
Thanks to the January 6th committee, we learned that insurrectionists came within 40 feet of Pence and his family. His life was very much in danger, but Donald Trump didn't care because Donald Trump waged an unrelenting public and private pressure campaign on his vice president after the election because Trump wanted Pence to overturn the election. Just last March, Trump blamed Pence for the violence, telling a crowd of supporters that it was Pence's fault because he refused to send the election back to the states. Joining me now is Olivia Troy, former senior advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, Hugo Lowell, political investigations reporter for The Guardian, and Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor, Georgetown professor of law, and MSNBC legal analyst. I will note that we do have some new reporting here from our own John Allen just moments ago in Manchester, New Hampshire, where Trump is, rather than being at the E. Jean Carroll trial, where he probably ought to be. He walked into the Red Arrow Diner. NBC's John Allen asked former President Trump about former Vice President Mike Pence testifying to this grand jury related to his efforts to overturn the election. Here's what Mike Allen asked him. Mr. President, what do you think of Mike Pence testifying today? And Trump said, oh, I don't know what he said, but I have a lot of confidence in him. You've covered Donald Trump for quite some time. What do you make of that and of the fact that Mike Pence finally did go in and testify?
That's not the message from behind the scenes in Trump world. They basically see Pence's testimony as potentially the most damaging thing that could be for Trump in the January 6th investigation. Look, Pence was there at all of the key moments. He was there on the night before the Capitol attack on January 5. He was there the morning of the Capitol attack, one-on-one with Trump. Yep. These are conversations that the January 6th committee could never get a hold of. Also, Pence was discussing how to, or whether he could use objections to throw out the election either to the House or to send it back to the states. And these are discussions that were being done at the White House with Republican members of Congress. So Pence saw a lot. He was there in the room all the way through from election night to January 6th. And that is why Jack Smith has been so interested in pursuing his testimony.
Yeah, I mean, Olivia, you could imagine that he would have a lot to say, right? He actually asked a former vice president, can I do this? Like, he did entertain the idea of overturning the election. I do want to play what his former aide Mark Short told the January 6th committee. This was part of his testimony. And this is the question of what Pence was being told and what he was saying to Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Was it your impression that the vice president had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the president, not just to the world through a Dear Colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
And had been consistent in conveying his position to the president?
Very consistent.
Consistent in saying, I don't have the legal right to do this. Donald Trump then goes out, does his speech, and then he tweets later and says Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what needed to be done. Here was the reaction of the crowd. This is on January 6th when Donald Trump puts up that tweet saying Mike Pence didn't have the courage.
I'm telling you what, I'm hearing the Pence just caved.
No.
Is that true? I'm hearing reports that Pence caved. No, I'm telling you, if Pence caved, we're going to drag through the streets. You politicians are going to get drugged through the streets.
Yes. I guess the hope is that there's such a show of force here that Pence will decide to do the right thing, according to Trump.
Where is Pence? Bring out Pence! Bring him out! Bring out Pence! Bring him out! Bring out Pence!
And yet, Olivia, Pence resisted testifying, was subpoenaed to testify, and still resisted it. What do you make of the fact that now he is talking and he has to tell his story?
Well, first, I think it's good that he's testifying. I think it's critical. He is definitely the one person who knows everything that happened in those conversations.
Yep.
And I think the jury needs to hear it. I think this gives him sort of the judicial and political top cover to be able to be forthcoming finally. He may not state it publicly, although he did write about it in his book.
He did.
But I think this gives him a little bit of leeway to say, look, I was compelled. I'm going to follow the law on this, and I'm going to tell the truth. And I hope that he did. I believe that he did. Look, I was at that January 6th hearing when they played that footage of how close that ugly, horrific, heinous mob came to him. And at the end of the day, he was my boss for 2.5 years, and I had a visceral reaction. Not only that I knew him as a human being and the fact that his family was put at risk and everyone else was, but also that was a sitting vice president of the United States that I keep going back to at the time, that our own U.S. president put at risk.
Yeah.
That should never be discounted, right? And to think that this is the front runner for the GOP, that person could come back into power.
Yeah.
I think that is why this Mike Pence testimony matters so much in front of these Americans, a jury of American peers.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that other elected officials would already preemptively support him to be president again, knowing what he did. Paul, as a prosecutor, I wonder what you would want to know from Pence the most. I mean, Pence has admitted at the Gridiron dinner, he said, he put my family at risk. He put me at risk. He admitted it when there were no cameras there. But he has said a few things that show that he does understand he was in danger of dying that day. What would you want to know?
So in his book, Pence wrote that he and Trump had a close working relationship for 4 years, but it didn't end well. How's that for an understatement? I want to know the details about what he meant by that. Prosecutors love grand juries. I've been in front of that D.C. grand jury many times. They love it because it's their forum. The defense attorney isn't allowed. The regular rules of evidence don't apply as long as it's relevant. You can ask 2 questions. The first is, when you told Trump that what he wanted you to do was unconstitutional, did he say, I disagree, which would be a defense, meaning that he lacked criminal intent? Or did he say, I don't care, do it anyway, which would implicate him in a criminal conspiracy of the highest order? The other question is about the violence that Olivia referenced. Pence's Secret Service detail on January 6th were texting goodbye messages to their family members. What did Trump talk to Pence regarding violence? How much potential for violence was Pence aware of? What were the one-on-one conversations between Pence and Trump on violence about that day and before?
And we know that there were phone calls in which Donald Trump got on the phone with Pence and called him the P word, according to Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka. And we know that Pence was refusing to get into a car with Secret Service agents that weren't his personal detail, that he said, I don't know where you're going to take me. So he understood the plot. He understood exactly what was being asked of him. If you're looking at this just from a prosecutor's point of view, if they're at the point now where they're talking to Pence, they've talked to Mark Short, they've talked to some of his other aides, does this tell you they're closer to making a decision, that Jack Smith is getting to a conclusion if he's now essentially interviewed the primary potential victim?
It does. There's nowhere else to go. Former President Trump is not going to come to the grand jury. So this is the highest order. And this week we learned that not only has the Justice Department prosecuted 1,000 people for crimes related to January 6th, they announced that they plan to prosecute another 1,000. Wow. That will be 2,000, but these are the little guys.
Right.
And so the question is, can 2,000 people be forced to face criminal consequences, but the person who seems to be the leader of the conspiracy escape accountability.
We're also waiting to find out what happens with the Proud Boys, right? We don't know if they're going to get charged with seditious conspiracy. Is that the fear among Trump world, that Pence being interviewed means that this is coming to a conclusion? And what is it that they plan to do? This man is running for president. He's now out there on the stumps doing exactly that.
Yeah, I think the Trump legal team sees Pence going in as basically the end of the investigation, or very, very near the end of the investigation. We've got a number of other Trump administration officials who are yet to go in, people like Nick Luna and kind of Dan's, people who are in the inner circle, very, very close, who lost their legal challenges and want to have to testify. That being said, I think we should just mention with Pence that there was an order from Jim Boasberg, the chief judge in the district court here, who essentially gave him some narrow scope of speech or debate clause immunity.
Right.
And we don't know the exact parameters of that, but it is important because that does protect, Pence from having to testify effectively about any preparations he had done to go for January 6th as presiding officer of the Senate.
Sure.
So that is important to remember. But I think Trump looks at all of this and sees an investigation that is bearing down on him.
I mean, and the part that they said that the judge ruled that the speech and debate clause doesn't protect him from talking about crimes, right?